Welcome to the third in the series of 4 of how to start a nonprofit. So what we're going to talk about today is what every new nonprofit needs to know about raising money. Well, you've probably filed your paperwork by now, and so you can start raising money. But where do you start if you don't have a donor list of supporters? See, obtaining money for a new nonprofit, it can be more difficult initially than when you become established. So today what we're going to talk about is exploring possibilities, creating systems, and beginning to have those conversations that are going to benefit the organization and help you start raising money. Specifically, what we're going to talk about today is assessing where to find donors, exploring peer-to-peer fundraising. We'll talk a little bit more about what that is, memberships, programs, and events, and marketing and advertising. First off, let's review your assignment from number 2. So what we asked was for you to write the purpose of what your nonprofit will be doing, and that was for your organizing documents, which are your bylaws, and that was using bullet points. And then the second homework assignment was to write your activity description for the IRS Form 1023, which is a narrative of what your nonprofit will do. So that is step 7, part 4 of the IRS Form 1023. Those two items are different, and that's why I highlighted the purpose and the activity description. That's going to play into what we're going to talk about today when we're going to start talking about raising money. Who do we ask? Who do we talk to? Where do we go from here? We talk about in fundraising, a fundraising plan. Some people call it a development plan. What we're going to call it is just an overview of a fundraising plan. And this is not an in-depth one that you'll be doing, but it's important if we're talking about raising money. Where do you start? The first thing is establishing achievable priorities related to your mission. And so if you have worked in a for-profit organization, it's very similar. You want to establish those priorities as to why you're in business and why you have a nonprofit, just like if you were in business. And so you may want to go back to the first one of these that we did when we talked about to be or not to be a nonprofit, and there were questions where you filled in the blanks. That will help you write that mission. You need to set financial goals just like you would a business. But the different piece of a nonprofit is that not everything is going to be financial related. Some of them are going to be strategic goals. Now, are they going to result in financial goals at the end? Most likely. But we'll talk about 2 different kinds of setting those goals and knowing what that looks like. Then we're going to talk about generating solicitation and cultivation strategies. Now, as we know, we don't want to be like used car salesmen. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we don't want to just walk up to somebody and say, hey, you want to give us money? So what we'll do is we will talk about how to cultivate people so that then it won't be uncomfortable when it is time to ask for money. We're going to talk about creating a communications calendar to stay on track. And that communications calendar is basically, what are you going to do? How are you going to talk about your nonprofit, and what types of things are you going to do? Let's start out with talking about our strategic goals. This is an example of what a strategic goal might be. Diverse and sustainable donor and revenue base supporting operating, capital, and reserve needs. So this is your monetary goal. What do you hope to bring in this year in donations? Now, if you filled out your Form 1023, they had you fill in a budget. So you'll know more about what is the annual revenue. And granted, if you haven't started your nonprofit yet, you're not going to know. You're not going to know how much you're going to raise. So it is a guess, But what we know is that when we set those goals, a lot of times we achieve them. So how many donors do you want? How many donors do you think it's going to take to achieve that 100,000? Is it going to take 50? Is it going to take 100? Is it going to take more? How much of that are you going to need in operating revenue? So you wrote what you're going to be doing, your activities. So how much is it going to take? How much money do you need to operate? The donor retention piece, that, although it doesn't sound like a monetary goal, it is. Donor retention is very low in the nonprofit world. It's somewhere below 50%. We want to try, at least with this new nonprofit, to see if initially we can start out at like an 80% donor retention. And as a caveat, we want to achieve $50,000 as a reserve goal by 2023 by securing 25K in 2021 and 25K in 2022. Now, these may not be your goals. These are just examples that I am giving to help you just kind of see where do we start and what do we do. So those are the monetary. Let's talk about the strategic goals that are non-monetary. They are things like 100% participation by the board in some fundraising task, including cultivation of donors. This is so important when you start a new nonprofit, is to get your board and your volunteers involved in connecting people to the organization. Because at the beginning, that's when everybody is so excited about what you're doing and, oh, wow, that's a great idea. And so you want to be able to light a fire under your board members and have them participate. Now, does this mean that they're just going to go out and start asking all their friends for money? Because a lot of times that's what board members are worried about. No, we don't want them going out and just asking for money. We want them to form relationships with people. And so what that means is that they're connecting you with people. A lot of nonprofits use the phrase, and I'll use my air quotes, get or give. So sometimes board members do not feel comfortable connecting you with people. They don't feel comfortable with their friends being asked for money, but they will write a check themselves. So giving them options of what they can do. But in the end, it's going to be a monetary goal, but it is a non-monetary goal right now. Developing a plan for ongoing recruitment and training of volunteers. That's important because a lot of times your volunteers will be ones that end up being donors. Developing new prospects for both a personal solicitation campaign and direct mail solicitation. So the direct mail are things that you get a lot of those at the end of the year where nonprofits are saying, we would like for you to donate to our nonprofit. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Strengthening your donor cultivation program through your current donors and board. Considering an event, including participants, guests, so participants that participate in your program. A lot of times you'll have them speak at one of these events because that really is the part where it gets people's heartstrings when we have participants talk at our events. Guests, donors, board, whatever that you can do. I know that as we're just coming out of COVID, we're still limited in gatherings, but figuring out how you can do something online, something to get people involved. And then maintaining the systems for ongoing monitor evaluation of the progress of all areas of your development, because a lot of people are going to ask that. So give us an idea of what kind of a difference you made. What kind of an impact did you make? We're going to talk more in the next one, in number 4 of this series, about actually setting up the systems, but maintaining those systems is part of the non-monetary goals. All right, so let's talk about where do we go to find donors? So what kind of funding is actually available? Well, the first one is from individuals. Those are the letters that you get in the mail. And family trusts, family foundations. I lump those together in one category because typically a family foundation or a trust, a family trust, is started by an individual or individuals within a family. So I put all those together, and I'll tell you a little more later as to why I put those together. And then there's granting foundations. So granting foundations are the ones that you probably know about, where somebody says, oh, you need to write a grant application for that. You might hear some of them say they need an LOI. An LOI is a letter of intent. So sometimes that letter of intent is all that a granting foundation will ask you for. So they either qualify you or don't qualify you based on that LOI. Now, family foundations and family trusts, a lot of them are beginning to ask for an LOI. Most of them do not require a long, drawn-out application. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we have private foundations. A private foundation is not a public charity because instead of receiving public support, they're funded and controlled either by an individual, a family, or most likely a corporation. They're things like the Walton Family Foundation because it's connected to Walmart, or the Coca-Cola Foundation because it's connected to, of course, Coca-Cola. Okay, so corporations and businesses. So that's another place that you can go for funding. There's several different kinds of funding that can happen within corporations. Like we just said, Coca-Cola, they have their own foundation. So that's one way. Then companies also have sponsorships. So if you're going to do an event, it might be a golf tournament, which I wouldn't suggest golf tournaments. Please don't start there. They are very much labor intensive. But if you were going to do a golf tournament, you could get sponsors. So that's another bucket of money that corporations or businesses have. And then sometimes a corporation or a business just needs to give money to a nonprofit. They need to write off a certain amount of money each year. Okay, then there are government grants. Typically, government grants require a ton of paperwork. They take a long time to write. They also take a long time to process, and then for you to actually receive funding. Associations. So a lot of times, if there's some association, like there's this one nonprofit, which is AFib, so people who have the heart condition AFib. Well, what they do is they go speak at doctor association meetings, medical association meetings. So a lot of times, those associations will actually donate to the nonprofit. So keep that in mind. Special events. So you hear about the big galas where some nonprofits raise millions of dollars. Those galas have changed in the world of a pandemic, but there are other types of special events where it's smaller groups, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of those. So then there's program revenue. Are you going to charge for the work that you do? Are you going to have memberships? That's something that it asks you on the 1023. And your program revenue is another place that you're able to get income, because you can charge for your program. And then if you have people who may need help, you can give scholarships. You can have donors give money for scholarships to help those people who may not be able to afford the program cost. And then there's in-kind gifts. In-kind gifts are a little bit different because that means that someone may give you websites. So they may say, hey, I'll do your website, but I would like for you to give me a letter for the number of hours that I've spent on your website. That's an in-kind gift. An in-kind gift may be something like a piece of artwork. It could be any number of things. Be cautious of your in-kind gifts. I had a client who wanted to give the school solar panels. They gave the school solar panels and they weren't functional. So the school then had to get rid of the solar panels, but because they have hazardous materials in them, the school had to pay to dispose of those panels. So be sure you just have a committee set up so that you don't just accept in-kind gifts without doing some checking on it. All right, the two that we're going to concentrate on are individuals and family trusts and private foundations for you to start with in a new nonprofit. The reason we don't go for granting foundations, which sometimes with our boards, with people, they think, oh, let me just write a grant. That would be so much easier. It's not easier. It takes longer to not only write the grant, but it takes longer to receive money from the grant. And there is so much competition just to go seeking grants. So we're not going to look at those. Corporations and businesses. There are some businesses that have done well during the pandemic, but there are a lot who haven't. So we may have gotten in the past in-kind gifts from restaurants or bars. They're not giving those as much now. So just here initially, if you know of a corporation or business that is directly related to your nonprofit, go ahead and do that. But we're not going to talk about those today. And we talked about government grants taking a long time. Associations are hurting right now. They haven't been able to have their meetings. And so they've had members drop out. They've had to do things online. We talked about galas not happening. Program revenue, that's going to take you a while to start getting that going. And in-kind gifts, that is not money that is going to necessarily help you operate. Okay, so why are we focusing on individuals, family trusts, and private foundations? Well, the Giving USA every year does a report on giving for the past year. The one for giving in 2020 has not come out yet, although I do have some initial reports that I will share with you. However, in the 2019 report, when we look at how much Americans gave, they gave $449.64 billion to charity. But what I want you to notice is, where did that generosity come from? 69% was from individuals. Remember, I said individuals or family foundations? That was the largest chunk of where money came from. And then the next largest chunk was 17% from foundations. Now, that 17% from foundations, that's great, but again, it takes a long time to get there. 10% were given by bequests, and I will want you to look at bequests at some point, but I wouldn't say start now, because I used to laugh and say, when I am looking at planned gifts, unless I'm going to give people cyanide along with that, it's going to take a while to realize those gifts. And to start up your nonprofit, you need money sooner. And then 5% is giving by corporations. And so when you look at this chart, I want you to just keep in mind that when somebody says, oh, you need to write a grant, think about where the majority of money comes from. All right, so the next thing I want you to see, so I told you there were some initial reports on what happened with giving in 2020, because we weren't sure in the midst of a pandemic where there were so many people who were out of work, what was going to happen with giving. Well, donors actually increased. Number of donors increased by 7%. Donations went up 10%. Now, donor retention, I told you, is pretty low. And so it did go down of people who had given to a nonprofit in 2019. Okay, so let's take a look at new donors. So this is the place as a new nonprofit that it is very good news for you. New donors were up 18%. New retained donors were down. So these were donors who gave in 2019 but did not give in 2020. And repeat retained donors were down 2.8%. But the recaptured donors, that means that there were donors who'd fallen away from nonprofits and they came back by 13%. But then let's take a look at the general donor, which was up 15%. These were donors under $250. Now, I know you're probably looking and saying, oh, I don't want to go for, $250 or under donations. I want to go for big donations. I understand that, but it's what we call in fundraising a test gift or a first gift. So typically people don't give $10,000 first gifts. They don't give $20,000 or $100,000 first gifts. They give something that's under $100. So this is great news. In 2020, it was up 15%. Those mid-level donors from $250 to $1,000, that was up 8%. And then major donors over $1,000 was up 10.4%. So this is a great time to be starting a nonprofit because people are still generous. Okay, so one of the questions I typically get, we're back to that chart from Giving USA. So what kinds of organizations do people give to that Giving USA saw? Well, 29% was religion, so that was the largest category. Education was right under that at 14%. Then human services, so human services covers a lot of different things. I think that human services one is going to have gone way up in 2020 giving. So that was 12%. 12% was given to foundations. 9% was to health. I think health was probably going to go up. And then we had public society, international affairs, arts, cultures, and humanities was only 5%. Interesting about that arts, cultures, and humanities, after 9/11, what we saw was giving went up to arts types organizations because people knew how much that was needed. So will that go up? We don't know. And then 3% to the environment and animals, and then 2% to individuals. Now's the time I would have you participate if you were here in person. Which organizations do you think that millennials support? So if you look up there, do you think it's social service organizations, health or disease charities, children and youth development, places of worship, or animal or welfare shelters? Well, if we were to look, the first that they support most often is children and youth development. The second one is health or disease charities. And the third one is animal welfare or shelters. Now, why do I talk about millennials? We'll talk about baby boomers in just a second. Millennials is taking over as one of the largest segments of our population. The millennial givers today are our large donors of tomorrow, and we need to be supporting them. So now let's talk about, what do baby boomers support? So do you think they support social service, health or disease, children and youth, places of worship, or animal welfare or shelters? Well, if you thought places of worship, baby boomers, that's number one. Number two is social service, and number three is health or disease charities. Baby boomers tend to be our largest, wealthiest, older donors right now. The greatest generation, the older generation, they typically are aging out, and they may not be the largest donors to our organizations these days. So here's a chart just so that you can see. Gen Xers fall in there. Some Gen Xers are also becoming larger donors. You see, the only way they really differ from the millennials is between the health and the social services. And then we have boomers, and then the matures are the ones that tend to be aging out right now. So this is important for you to keep in mind as you're thinking about who's going to be the best person who's going to want to support my organization. Okay, so we're going to talk about the 8-step major gift management cycle. Now, there's all kinds of gift management cycles out there. Some of them have 6 different categories, some have 8. This comes from the Indiana University School of Philanthropy, where I have my certificate from. And I like this one because it goes through what we do. We start off with identify, and then we qualify, and then we develop a strategy, we cultivate, we acknowledge and recognize, we steward those people, we renew it, and then we identify again what might that person be interested in. And this cycle just keeps going around and around. So today, what we're going to talk about is identifying and qualifying. And then next time we'll talk a little bit more about developing strategy, but identifying and qualifying is going to be plenty of a place for us to start today. So when we talk about the wheel of responsibilities, so when we're looking at the wheel of responsibilities, I want you to look at yourself as being in the center of that. And then think about all the different places that you encounter people. During COVID, you may have been encountering them on Zoom like this. You may have been encountering them on the telephone. You may have encountered them on a walk in the park. But I want you to look at all those different organizations and think about who might be interested in what my nonprofit does. And then I want you to write names of people who may be interested in each of these areas on this circle here. And then I want you to go next to this constituency model. Now, some of these things you will not have because you're a new nonprofit, but the idea, you can replace the words in here with the words that make sense for you. It starts in the center. These are the people who are closest to your nonprofit and what your nonprofit does. These are people who may have said, oh, tell me when you start that nonprofit because I want to be involved. These are your major donors. It's the organization, it's your board. It's if you're going to hire some people, it's the management. So it's this center circle is where it starts. And then it works out from there. So your volunteers, your employees, what about your general donors? These are people who you know can't give a major gift, but they may be able to give $20 or $30, and they may be able to give it every month. These are clients. So if you have an organization where you're serving people, for instance, I work with equine therapy, and they have clients that they give physical or occupational therapy to. And then it moves out to, you won't have any former board members or former participants or former donors, but you might have something as a new nonprofit that is a little farther out that you could talk to. People with similar interests, then the whole organization's universe, like getting an article in the paper, who might be interested. So looking at every part of your and your board members' lives. I like to have board members fill this out too. Okay, so when we do look at this, what are we looking for? Well, we want somebody that has linkage to your organization. So somehow, how are they connected to your organization? Then, do they have the ability to give? And do they have an interest in what you do? I tell this story that I was working with an equine therapy group, and they worked mostly with children who had some type of disability. So they met with this donor, this potential donor. She had never given any money. They had met with her 2 or 3 times. And so I went with the executive director to meet with her. So she sits down and she says, I don't like children and I hate horses. So as you can see, I mean, there was nothing there. She definitely had the ability. She had 2 family foundations that she was on the board of, but she did not have an interest. She had a linkage because she lived nearby the location of where it was based. So she had a linkage to it, but she had no interest at all. So basically what we're looking for, do they have the capacity? Do they have the inclination and the affinity to give? And not that you can't talk to people that don't fall into this, because they may know other people. So that's the question that you want in that part of your conversation. If they say, don't like horses, don't like children, and you know that's what you do you know anybody else who may be interested? So you're trying to make those connections. Okay, so where are you going to look? The very best place to find information is peers. These are people who know people. We have all of these really great programs out there that use artificial intelligence, and they can tell us who might be interested in this nonprofit. But doesn't mean the information's accurate. Our board members, if they are well connected, they are peers of these people, and they will know if they have the linkage, the interest, and the ability to give. Periodicals, so whether it be newspapers, whether it be ways that, you know, we don't have that many magazines, but there are some magazines online. There are some local magazines, like here we have like the Vail Valley magazine. There are magazines for specific neighborhoods, like there's a magazine for Cordillera, which is a community here. There's Singletree has their own magazine. So reactive research. So we see something and we react to it and say, oh, they would be a good donor for our nonprofit. Corporate research. There's something called matching gifts that sometimes corporations give. And so looking at what corporations give matching gifts. And so that means that if you work for Intel and you give a gift to a nonprofit, Intel will match that. Sometimes they'll match it 1-to-1. So doing corporate research, finding who might be interested in what your nonprofit does. Researching foundations. And I said, we are not going to go after grants necessarily first, but some foundations research gives you family foundations and family trusts. And then there's the push technology. That's you setting up a Google alert. So maybe you put what kind of nonprofit, who you're serving, you put it into Google, and it then sends you emails when there's information that you need to see. Okay, so where do you find that information? Well, we just talked about a Google alert. You probably know of Zillow, which will tell you about their house, how much their house is worth, helping you know, do they have the wealth to be able to give. If you're looking for corporate, there's something called hoovers.com. There's Foundation Directory Online. Sometimes libraries subscribe to this. Sometimes community foundations subscribe to this. So look around and see who might subscribe, because it is fairly expensive, although you can just join for a month. It will give you some matching gift information. It will also tell you family foundations. That's why I like Foundation Directory Online. Newspapers sometimes are really good, because if you do a Google search and you find that an obituary, a lot of times it'll tell family members' names and help with that. Facebook, LinkedIn, and other social media sites are great places to find information. This next screen, this is something that I really like. It's called Relationship Science, and it will tell us who that person knows and give us information to help us move forward. There's all kinds of programs like that you know, again, we want to verify with someone who knows them. Okay, so continuing on. So every nonprofit has to file something called a Form 990 every year. There's something that's free called GuideStar, and you can go in and search those 990s, and they, a lot of times for family foundations, will say who they gave money to, which will help you know, oh, are they interested in what we do? Charity Navigator is another one like GuideStar that's free. Invitations, donor lists, donor recognition will help you see donor interest. I don't like the idea of going and just looking at an annual report for a nonprofit and lifting all of those names out of there and putting them in your database. I think it's important for you to do research and see, what do these people give to other organizations, and What are their interests? And of course, alumni organizations are a great place to go. You can find a lot of that information on LinkedIn, or if you're a member of an alumni organization. Community foundations are a great place because they have donors who may be willing to give to your nonprofit. The corporate or business websites, which you probably think about that. Insider information, the J3SG, then anybody who gives a political donation, it has to be listed, so you can find that in the Federal Election Commission. Then there's People Finders and been verified. Some of those, you've probably done this where you click on it and then it wants you to pay to get more information, but at least it's someplace that you can get some initial information. Okay, we said we were going to explore peer-to-peer fundraising, membership programs, and events. So peer-to-peer fundraising is one of those where you run a race. So you might put on a Facebook page, hey, I'm running a race and I'd love for you to be part of my team, and our team is going to raise $5,000. That's peer-to-peer fundraising. And you can subscribe to programs, to software that will do this for you. So other types of peer-to-peer fundraising that you can do are outside small group gatherings. You can do run your own race events. You can also, for another type of event, do online education and participation. You know, you see a lot of these fun ones, like it's teaching you cooking, it's teaching you how to make something, artwork. You can have a virtual film festival and have people donate. Choose a holiday and make it a big deal. A few months ago that it was Mardi Gras. Well, they knew they couldn't gather together, so they had something that this nonprofit made up called Yardy Gras, because in their yard for Yardy Gras, they put all types of different float information, made their house look like a float. So choosing a holiday and making a big deal out of it. And then, of course, getting sponsorship for any types of those events. And you've been asked in your 1023 if you're going to have memberships. You know, we go both ways. If you have questions about that, ask me about that. Okay, so next we're going to talk about marketing and advertising. A good way to market and advertise is by having a membership. Oh, join our organization. You know, we've got a great group of people here. You want to be a part of this. Programs or events are a great way that you can market what we're doing. We just talked about a Facebook birthday fundraiser. Peer-to-peer fundraising, that's a great way, because then you have all these people out there that are forming these teams that then bring other people into the fold to find out about your nonprofit. There's one, Roundup River Ranch, which is a Paul Newman camp for kids with serious illness. They weren't able to do it this year, called Superhero Ski Day. And each of the teams raised money, and then the superheroes were the kids that got to actually come and ski on Superhero Ski Day. Social media is a great place to advertise. It's still relatively inexpensive to advertise on Facebook, and you can target your audience, which is great. LinkedIn is a little more expensive, but if that's where your target donors hang out, I'd say it's worth it. Friends, relatives, business associates, that's the circle I was talking about with you in the center and what all around you. In one of the first ones of these that we did, we talked about an assessment, assessing the what your nonprofit's doing and getting people's feedback, and then you're kind of bringing them into the fold. Okay, I want you to rank 1, 2, and 3 the top reasons why you think people give money to nonprofits. Is it because they're moved to donate in response to an event in the news? Because someone the donor knows directly asked me to donate? Is it a gift to a friend, birthday, retirement, that you know someone that's affected by the cause, that they're passionate about the cause, in memory of someone, that they know the organization I care about depends on me? Or is it an awareness through ads and communication? Or did they see a post on social media? So as you look through, what do you think are the top 3 reasons? Well, the number one reason that people give is that they're passionate about the cause. The number two reason is they know the organization I care about depends on me. And number three is they know someone who is affected by the cause. So this next chart, this is an ABILA donor engagement study that was done. It was done a few years ago, but I still think it's pretty accurate. So when you are looking at your new nonprofit and say, how in the world am I going to get people excited? Well, you want to get people passionate about your cause, and you want them to know how appreciative you are if they are willing to give to your cause. And being sure that you've done your research and you know if there's a connection with them and the cause. Okay, I said I was going to talk a little bit about this marketing and advertising calendar. What I like to do is, this is an Excel spreadsheet, and I like to break it down into the nitty gritty, because you've got a new nonprofit and there's all these things that you could do. But I want you to break it down into the task and who's the lead. Now, the lead is probably going to be you on most of the things, but remember your board, remember your volunteers, and what types of things, like this particular client, they did have, or they were planning on a golf event. They ended up not having a golf event. Training volunteers, identifying people who are going to ask for money, creating your major gift list. This is so important for you to look at what is it that needs to be done and to put it in bite-sized pieces. All right, let's review where we've been today. Assessing where to find donors. Exploring peer-to-peer fundraising, memberships, programs and events, and marketing and advertising. Now, if you have any questions, just send them to me. And now we'll talk about what your assignment is before the next one. I want you to write the names of people in the roles and responsibility chart who may be interested in your new nonprofit. Just write as many people's names as you can. And then I want you to choose 5 people from this list who you could call and ask for their advice on who you should contact. You're not asking them for money. You're just asking them, who do you know? Are you interested in this? And so coming up with a phone script. Now, the next one of these will be choosing the right strategy to set up your nonprofit. And if you're going to attend in person, it's on May the 5th. Or it will be on demand. That's all for today. Thank you so much for being here. Remember, if you have any questions, feel free to email me, call me, and I'll be happy to answer those. Thanks so much.